Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world. Very happy to share the rest of the conversation with Michelle Gredes, Director of the Digital Security Project at the Civil Liberties Defense Center, as well as Cora Borodale, who is on the board of the CLDC. For this podcast special, you'll hear the remainder of the discussion that we shared a little bit of last week, where Cora and Michelle will discuss different tools for more secure encrypted communication that's available on various platforms to folks that are organizing. They publish guides on cldc.org/security. We discussed encrypted and open source alternative to Slack, which is called Keybase. Talked about PGP email encryption, particularly the Enigmail tool. Signal Messenger, problems with WhatsApp, CryptPad, Jitsi, Wire, VPNs versus the Onion router, the Tor browser, the Onion Share, Zoom, Proton Mail, and some of the challenges of running long-standing movement infrastructure such as the Beehive Collective does. You can check out our show notes for links to some of these projects. The Final Straw Radio is a proud member of the Channel Zero Network of Anarchist Podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
Ransom notes.
Anarchist and anti-authoritarian music podcast
that's going to come out every month.
Ransom what? Ransom notes. Ransom notes.
So what's your ultimate goal, I guess, in this?
We out for the
rising up against the oppressor.
The attitude that you see in hip-hop.
Let me give you a sample of some of the lyrics that had some of the older ladies among the stockholders white with dismay.
Go to ransomnotes.libsyn.com
or get them from the Channel Zero Network.
I'm speaking with Cora Borodale and Michelle Gredes. Cora is an associate professor of computer science at Oregon State University with a focus on the security state and the adoption of more secure apps. And Michelle also works at Oregon State University researching and teaching communications security for social movements. Michelle is the digital security coordinator for the Civil Liberties Defense Center. Thank you both so much for being willing to chat.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We co-founded the Digital Security Program at the CLDC, but the CLDC has been around for over 20 years now, right? And was founded by Lauren Regan.
Could you all tell us a bit about the sort of work that you're doing and around movements in digital security, and by what criteria do you judge the tools that you're looking at?
Yeah, so we started doing trainings for mostly local, regional, environmental groups around digital security with the Civil Liberties Defense Center. We started that many years ago now, 2013, 2014, 2015, somewhere around there.
There's a big environmental law conference that has a long history, international and local radical environmental groups too, in Oregon, at the University of Oregon, called Public Interest Environmental Law Conference. So we got started there to do outreach to a bunch of groups at once.
Mm-hmm. And since then, those trainings have continued, with varying degrees of frequency. For example, November of 2016 was a relatively popular month for digital security trainings. And since then, my research actually shifted from something completely unrelated to digital security to trying to figure out how we as trainers could best serve those communities. So basically taking the research time that I have as a professor to figure out what people's needs are, whether or not they're adopting tools correctly, and other aspects of state surveillance. And we also designed a course on communication security and social movements at Oregon State University, which was a lot of fun and continues to be a lot of fun when we teach it. In terms of the criteria for judging tools, at the beginning, it was, just any kind of encrypted channel that you could get between two parties was good, because that, when we started doing this, it predated Signal, it predated Keybase, it predated anything that was easy to use at all. But now we actually, can think about, easy tools to use, tools that really fit what a group of people need. So tailoring to the specific needs of a group, like what kind of information they're sharing, how many people they're sharing with.
Yeah, I think Signal was on the scene for a while, but it wasn't quite as popular as it is now. But that was kind of the only thing that was available. That and PGP, which is notoriously complicated to use. And I made an easy 42-step guide for people to walk themselves through that. And we managed to get a lot of people, up and running with PGP that may have thought it not practical before, but it's a thing that can break. And so with the many tools that we have now, the main criteria is just, all of the things that Cora said about with the goal being to how do you minimize trust in the platform and the infrastructure between you and your comrades or friends. And so end-to-end encryption is a big part of that, but open source also makes a big difference, makes it harder for someone to, some organization, developer team or whatever, to comply with a government request to put in something nefarious like a backdoor.
And oftentimes it comes down to specific needs of the groups in terms of, Signal is a great go-to first step for people to open up an encrypted communications channel for them to work with. But not everybody has a smartphone. Not everybody has reliable internet access. So that's when other tools sometimes need to be thought about, opening up to things that can run on computers, things that you can run in a web browser if someone's only ever checking their email on public computers or friends' computers.
Like when you design the class or you're talking to groups, I'm sure that it changes group to group, but is the presumption that you're threat modeling for a government actor, or with environmental groups or labor or other activist groups, is there a concern about third party, private organizations that maybe industry groups that might be trying to surveil or fash?
Absolutely the latter. So, often, as with people fighting pipelines and large fossil fuel infrastructure projects, right? It's both corporate and government actors that they're often facing in opposition. And often the corporate and government actors are working together, like we saw in North Dakota. So, and they have different tools available to them, right? Government actors have easier access to subpoenas of Google and Facebook for information, just sending a friendly letter that says, hey, please, can you hand over all of this information? We're interested in the activities of this group, and they hand over that information and it's completely legal. Whereas, a corporate actor would not have eyes on them if they're using a Stingray or something that collects cell phone information within a given area. So we definitely think about both.
And it's hard to imagine a situation where, yes, a government is an adversary, but a large corporation isn't. It's like we talk about the state in trainings all the time as just being, the assembly of powerful large corporations and government agencies. There's not really a distinction there. But yeah, but Fash, I think what we were going to say.
Yeah, that's kind of a lot harder. A lot of people ask, how can I stop myself from being doxxed? And it's like, well, go back 20 years and don't use the internet. But, it can be very difficult to get information that's already online, offline, right? If it's already out there, it's out there for people to find. But I think it does start a conversation about what information are you making publicly available about yourself? If you're someone who's active on social media, really thinking about that as a curated space where you share, you don't share the most personal and private information that could be used to damage you or your friends or loved ones.
And if you're explicitly, organizing against Nazis, they don't have a lot of technological resources or expertise at their disposal necessarily, but they can also, steal your laptop and your phone and not really care if they're running afoul of the law. So, basic device security like that is good. And yeah, you can be proactive a little bit against doxing by, if you're an organization, if you're some Antifa group or something, and I think the security level is pretty high among groups like that, but anyone that might be targeted by local adversaries like that, just having a single organizational Twitter account that is locked down with two-factor authentication or any other social media that you would do rather than, posting stuff to your own personal accounts. I think this is pretty standard, but I think there's a lot more people getting into organizing now with community mutual aid efforts and whatever that might not be familiar with these kind of security culture standards that are pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I know that some of the mutual aid groups have been doing a lot of their initial organizing based off of Facebook groups and coordinating volunteers with Facebook and over Facebook, and that worries me so much. But also a level of people being upfront and open about legal activity that they're participating in is fully reasonable, and it's good for people to be accessible in order, to reach out further, not only for people that they would be offering mutual aid to, but also to make themselves accessible to volunteers who might want to get on board. But so you've mentioned Signal as a tool that could be a good beginning encrypted platform for people to communicate through, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind talking about a few other tools that in your toolbox that you think that people might want to hear about, and sort of some of the positives that they offer, as opposed to the corporate free platform stuff that's available, for instance, from Google.
Yeah. So I've really loved Keybase as a thing to recommend that goes beyond what Signal has. It has more features. It has groups and subgroups and different levels of controls that you can have over that. It can be overwhelming, though, for someone to jump into if they've never used something like that before. But if someone has been using Slack, then using Keybase should be relatively easy. It also has remote file storage, which I don't think a lot of people take advantage of, but I have seen used in an organizing setting to good effect. It's also, you don't have to have a phone number to use it, so you don't have to release your phone number to a group that you might not normally do that with, and you can have multiple usernames on it and so on. So it's quite extensible, much more extensible than Signal is. It does have a social media aspect to it that may not be great. Like you can follow people on Keybase, and that is publicly available on their website, so you kind of have to inform people that, well, if people follow you and if you follow people, then that's going to be known on their website. Yeah,
and I mean, it's designed partly to so I can easily communicate with someone who I only know on the internet without having to know them in real life. Mm-hmm. So just, based on Final Straw's Twitter account, if you associate that with your Keybase account, I can know for sure that I'm talking to the person on Keybase who controls that social media account. But of course, none of this matters if you're organizing with people that you know already. And so, we just try to get people to choose anonymity with a username and avoid all the social media entanglements with Keybase, so they don't accidentally, dox themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Can you make your Keybase account unfollowable or invisible unless somebody is specifically looking for your email address?
I don't think so.
No, not to my knowledge.
Yeah.
The best protection is just to not use your, real name.
Yeah.
Use your organizing name. You can have separate accounts. The metadata piece, which I'm not sure if we're gonna formally talk about, they don't really make any efforts to protect who's having conversations with who from the point of view of Keybase, the company that makes the platform.
The servers, right?
Yeah, the servers. So if they were given a request or whatever, who knows if they would comply with it or not. I think you should always assume that they're going to comply, because that's the worst case. They can tell you all the people who you're organizing with, as well as their, the physical location of their computer and stuff. So if you are really concerned about that, using a VPN from the get-go when you start is a good idea. But that's not really something that's that easy to protect in a formal way. Signal does a really great job of doing its best to not know anything about its users, not store who is contacting whom. There's no guarantees there. Signal could, of course, decide to record all that information for an individual, but yeah, if you want that kind of protection, Signal's the best bet.
Mm-hmm.
As far as a step up from Signal loops, I mean, definitely the metadata, as you mentioned, is a downfall. But it seems like if you're coordinating longer lasting discussions with people on a complex theme, or you're sharing links, you're sharing files, you're moving and building off of conversations that you've been having file storage, having subgroups instead of just a bunch of dislocated loops from each other. And I think that you can pin stuff in there, but it seems like the format is, and there's a mobile option for it too, right? So
yeah, I mean, you can do a lot more, organize a lot more complex discussions just using channels. You can have sub-teams that are really private, so you could have a public facing mutual aid organization, and then a little sub-team under that's just for the core organizers, and no one in the bigger team even knows of the existence of the smaller team. One really important thing that's really handy if you're going to scale up big conversations and organizing is that Signal is a beautiful anarchic kind of platform where no one is in control of a group, right? It's like everybody just voluntarily joins a group. But the only downside of that is that if it gets big enough, people that might be behaving badly have to also voluntarily leave, which sometimes people aren't willing to do. So Keybase, you can have like team administrators that can kick people out or whatever if they like lose control of their accounts. I don't know if you've been in a signal loop of like hundreds of people where you really wish someone would leave, and then you got to like recreate the whole thing from scratch. Yeah, Keybase is really nice for that.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the issue of, like, because it's your phone number that's coming up in Signal and because you can get added to a loop, sometimes people don't have consent and they get added to a loop with a bunch of strangers that maybe that person that added them knows everyone in the room, but not everyone knows everyone, nor do they necessarily want to share space if they do know each other. Like, you could get added into a loop with an ex and suddenly they have your phone number. Like, that's...
Yeah,
in some ways,
unintended consequences of design. That's a really good example.
But so that's not the only platform that does encrypted end-to-end coordinating. Do y'all care to talk about Riot.im? It's okay if it's not a thing that you're familiar with.
Well, no, yeah, I'm familiar with it. I just don't. I don't think it's quite ready for prime time yet, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
I mean, Riot is really exciting. It's based on a platform called Matrix, and that's kind of like a general communications platform. So like something that you could build out a bunch of different clients on top of. So it's very community minded in its design in that way. It's like anyone could build a client that'll talk to it easily, like old school Jabber or whatever, for example, XMPP. But it's a little bit tough. You gotta, one downside is you have to enable end-to-end encryption. It's not on by default. And that's always dangerous that you say, hey, here's a secure platform. And people don't know that it's possible to accidentally send things that aren't encrypted. I mean, it's getting better all the time, and it's a community-driven project that I really love, and I'm excited to see how it develops. But it doesn't have like a single legal entity, behind it that's raising a ton of money, and so the development's just going to be a little bit slow. For the future, I think it's great. I think it would be really friendly to use on Tor for anonymity and things like that. But for now, I just feel like it's too hard to pick up for someone to use safely, unfortunately, because I know people have a lot of high hopes for it. So I'm just looking forward to how it develops, I guess.
PGP, you had mentioned having a very easy, friendly 42 step.
I got it down to like 20 or something at some point.
We actually did a follow-up survey with people that we had trained on PGP to see if they were actually using it. There's all these academic papers that say people can't use PGP, it's the worst thing ever. And we're like, well, people are using it. We know people who are using it. And so we did this follow-up survey. It was actually pretty interesting to see that, yes, people were adopting PGP in the long term, but that it seemed that people who were engaged in higher risk activism were less likely to adopt it than people engaged in lower risk activism, which is probably not what you would hope for from a security standpoint, but maybe makes a lot of sense in that, if you're taking on higher risk activism, you probably have a higher threshold for risk in, more generally, and so maybe you can't be bothered with something as complicated as PGP if you don't see the benefit of it, and if you think if you feel like you're taking on risks otherwise. But PGP, we don't do PGP trainings anymore.
It's just it's something that can break. PGP it still works. Like the encryption is sound, so that's kind of amazing given that it's decades old at this point. It's a little bit brittle. It is like 90s crypto. There's like one key that if you steal it, like if an adversary gets a hold of an old key sitting around somewhere, then they get all of your messages, past, future. Signal and Keybase and other platforms make it a lot easier to like change keys, add new devices securely. The short of it is like PGP is great if you have to use email to organize, but if you don't, there's a lot of other platforms. I mean, I like email because
I would still really recommend it. For example, for lawyers and their clients. For example, these lawyers tend to be very wed to using email for their work.
And if you have to keep records, like lawyers do, you're not going to lose things on email. Yeah. Email also will never go away, right? Like if Keybase, the platform, gives up, then no more Keybase, or Signal goes away overnight, no more Signal. But I think the answer to that is like, just make sure you have a backup, like have a couple of different ways to get in touch with people. I did a post shit-talking Proton Mail at CLDC quite a ways back. And I didn't get that much attention from the Proton Mail folks until I wrote another post saying, you know what, Proton Mail's not so bad anymore. And then they kind of like saw it and they're like, no, we're very sorry. Please take back what you said. I mean, Proton Mail's a lot better. It's easy to pick up, because you just sign up for this one website, and it does play nice with other PGP now, which is not true at when they got started. So it's still, if people like gotta organize by email, I would say this is the easiest thing is like, just go ahead and use Proton Mail. You gotta trust them, but you gotta trust all the email providers.
Well, I was going to say with Proton Mail, that's interesting. So if I have a PGP key associated with an email and I'm sending from whatever client, I'm encrypting it. I can encrypt it to the Proton Mail account.
And you just have to get the public key from the Proton Mail person, and they can export that key and send it to you. I don't use PGP as much as I used to, so I don't know whether you're an old hand at PGP, right? So I don't know whether the key servers automatically fill up with Proton Mail keys. I don't know if they do. It'd be really cool if
MIT's
they did.
PGP key server has been down for a while now. So,
PGP. Yeah. I mean, one thing that's cool, I would say, with PGP is that if everybody and all their friends are all on Gmail, that's horrible, right? Obviously, Google and all of its infrastructure is like one of the first things that should like get burned to the ground, metaphorically. But
legally you can say allegedly, and it takes away all the legal recourse.
Allegedly, I would say. Anyway, relegated to the dustbin of history. How's that? So anyway, there's a Gmail plugin that's open source that works with the Gmail web client called FlowCrypt. So like flowcrypt.com. It's like super easy, encrypt your existing email. So like if all your networks are already on Gmail, it's something that's like an easy add-on. I don't know. There's like, unions, like some local, like grad student union, whatever. Every organization uses Google Apps on the back end. So if they're doing that already, it's like a quick thing that they can do to make encryption feel easy.
But then you can't search your emails, which I think is what everybody wants from Gmail.
But then they'll just realize Gmail's intrinsically broken, and dustbin of history gets closer.
I will say that I've found the project, the PEP or Pretty Easy Protection, that has sort of joined up with Enigmail, has made that add-on to Thunderbird very easy to create keys. A little too easy sometimes, but like really easy to create key pairs with and just automatically start like back and forth PGP email if the other person's using something similar or has a key that they've shared with you.
Yeah, and I love efforts like that. It's just, if I have time, I guess, with somebody, I usually don't choose to spend it on email.
Yeah.
I try to spend it on encrypting storage, encrypting like voice, video conversations, other things. So yeah, hella props to projects like that. I think it's great that people are trying to make things more accessible.
Well, since we're so close to what we were just talking about, how about what's up with Rise Up?
I mean, Rise Up changed the world for activists, where, I think for anybody that remembers Seattle or had, an elder tell them about
the city is still there, just so everyone understands.
What's that?
Talking about the city is still there, just so everyone understands. Seattle's
and
not
so
going
for people of a certain age, Seattle is not really a city. It's a place and a memory in our collective history. The Battle of Seattle, in 1999. I think, activists showed up there, and people that were more tech-minded at that time were like, activists don't even have email addresses. Like, we have no infrastructure at all. So they were brilliantly and heroically, I think, brought a lot of infrastructure to groups, and it's just, if you need to have an email list, you can have a radical email list on Rise Up, and it's not a one-stop shop where everything's a Google group that can easily be searched by the state. I think they are great with their security resources on their website. They are the first ones to say, please encrypt your email, the email that's stored on our servers, so we don't have to have it. I think they have a lot of integrity. They've obviously resisted taken strong measures to to use warrant canaries and so on to make it difficult for the state to compromise them. Do you have any thoughts on RiseUp?
Nothing beyond that.
Yeah, and the thing I worry about is something that I've gotten asked before. It's like, well, why should we use RiseUp? Isn't that like, could it be a honeypot? Yeah. And like, I don't think that is. I think there's enough people there's enough personal connections with the RiseUp project that I think that that's pretty unlikely. But for any organization that exists over decades, to be sure that you're free from infiltrators is very difficult to guarantee. I think if anyone could do it, RiseUp could. I think one big thing is it's really hard to secure a server online against a advanced persistent threat. Basically a state-level actor or large corporation that's willing to target you and not give up. And they'll just wait until some vulnerability wasn't publicly patched, like that Heartbleed SSH vulnerability from a few years ago, or you forgot to update a server, or some weird exotic bug kind of came up and they're able to get in. I think RiseUp is great for autonomy and having autonomous infrastructure, but I think people should be very sure to encrypt their information so that if RiseUp ever got broken into, which happens to the best the best-hearted and most careful people can have their computers broken into. They should just try to make sure not to keep their whole lives on RiseUp.
No, I don't know if I have more thoughts on RiseUp.
I just really don't want to shit talk them because they're so great and they've done so much. But I would not say use a RiseUp email account. It's safe and secure. Like it's so hard to be sure about that.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And I think that there's a lesson right there in terms of just not putting all of our eggs in a basket, right?
And RiseUp themselves would say, please encrypt your email, because then that reduces their legal exposure too. Like, I know they would go to prison for us, I believe that, but I don't want them to.
Yeah.
And the less information they have, you're protecting them too by encrypting your RiseUp email. And I still have a RiseUp email that I use all the time, but it's always encrypted. So.
And they also offer a few other services beyond that. There's the instance of Crabgrass that they host. There's some people that try to use it. I hate it. It's terrible.
I know, but it's beautiful.
It was great when indie media was still like the main like activist media resource.
I mean, I do use RiseUp Share every now and then. I use RiseUp Pad every now and then, but mostly when I, want to use it on my phone, and CryptPad is a little bit clunky on the phone.
They offer a VPN service?
Yeah, I haven't used their VPN service.
Yeah, it's free, but again, it comes down to if I was the state and I wanted to get a whole bunch of like lefty anti-establishment activist stuff, I would probably try to break into RiseUp. I just think they have a very difficult job to do. It's like a very hard project. I think they could, I don't know anybody at RiseUp currently, unfortunately, but, one thing that I think they could really do is just, switch over to some end-to-end encrypted platforms, just do a CryptPad install, stuff like that. I think they could do well to maybe update some of their technologies to use other open source projects. I think that would be awesome.
So you mentioned CryptPad. Would you all mind breaking down what that is?
Yeah, so CryptPad is an end-to-end encrypted version of Google Docs essentially. So they have spreadsheets and basic forms now, right? And plain Word-like documents to edit. So it has collaborative editing
and a little shared drive space if you want to collaborate with a team like Google Drive does. Yeah.
So I like it for when people are insist that I can't go back to the 90s and share a file back and forth. It hurts my brain to do that, and they insist on being able to edit a document at the same time. Then I would absolutely recommend CryptPad. I don't think I would use it for long-term file storage. I would probably for a file that people are actively editing, have it in CryptPad and then save it locally or save it into your Keybase remote drive space for your group.
Yeah, just for people that don't know, CryptPad is interesting. It you talked about encryption with a bunch of rad folks on the show a lot. Mm-hmm. But encryption just relies on keeping your keys safe, your encryption key safe. If it's something like PGP, then it's keeping your private key safe, right? CryptPad is cool. You don't need to make a private key or a key in advance. The key is in the web browser address. So it's going to be like long and random. So kind of like a RiseUp pad, right? You have kind of like a random set of letters, but this is going to be like a totally random string. You need to have some encrypted channel like Signal or Keybase or something to be able to share those links in the first place. So it's important that CryptPad kind of doesn't stand on its own. Yeah. You always need to pair it with something else. And keep that link secret. Don't like post it.
So that kind of like knowing the address of the pad and that being a danger kind of reminds me of the one of the issues with Zoom that was coming up. But before we go there, like there was an issue, I guess, with like some of the Zoom bombing happening or people jumping into Zoom meetings because they were using algorithms to predict the addresses of rooms, and then whatever they were using would ping. Cool, you hit a room, and then just people would just pile into whatever room and disrupt it. Is that something similar that could happen with CryptPad?
No, it's a really, really long string.
Like it's random.
So there's not only the web address is actually broken up into two parts. The part that is actually sent over the internet to CryptPad to get your file, and then the part of the address that isn't and is only used as a decryption key within your browser to decrypt that file. And so both of those parts are pretty long. Like the address to actually go and retrieve the file from CryptPad is a long random string, much longer than the 7 or 10 digit phone number length things that Zoom uses for their rooms. And then the decryption key is much, much longer. It's 120 bits. I don't actually remember, but
it's not guessable.
It's not guessable.
Even by a machine. At least not a machine over the internet. So that's not really a risk. The only risk is, oops, I posted our meeting notes
to Facebook.
Yeah.
Right.
We're going to take a little musical break, and here is the track Virus Strike by Glutton For Insurrection out of Chicago. Well, so I was hoping we could touch on Jitsi and Wire, and I'm not sure if there's anything else. But these being like interesting alternatives to Zoom for meetings, if you want to talk about those.
Yeah, so Wire I like as a backup communicate, because you can use it as an instant messenger, instead of Signal. I don't find it as snappy as Signal though, but it does support end-to-end encrypted calls for small groups of people. So you can't have 100 people, but you can have 10?
Yeah, it's 10, but no video, unfortunately, and that's fine.
So that I think that's good. That's a great option, especially now if you're have your small group of people that you do organizing with, but you can't all meet together. I would definitely recommend Wire for that. Jitsi Meet is for bigger groups. It's not end-to-end encrypted, so you have to trust whatever server it's running off. But May 1st has a Jitsi Meet install, meet.may1st.org. And I think May 1st is a great group, much like Rise Up, that's supporting wonderful infrastructure for leftists
with strong commitments to not cooperate with authorities.
Mm-hmm. So but I would view that much more as we're renting the local
union hall,
or church space or whatever to use for our big meeting, but we can't have our big meeting in person anymore, so we're doing it online. I would treat it as hey, there could be someone sitting at the door that you didn't invite in who's listening in, for example.
Is there a way to host an instance of Jitsi to actually do end-to-end encrypted? It wouldn't
be end-to-end encrypted. It's like there's just to kind of frame it. It's like the best level 1000 or whatever encryption is going to be end-to-end encryption, because then you don't have to trust the infrastructure between you and your friend.
Well, if I can just say, it depends on who you're saying is the end, right? So if your own group has your own server, then you can consider your server one of those ends that's allowed to have the decrypted information, right? And in fact, Zoom for many years was promoting their technology as end-to-end encrypted in their white papers. That was complete nonsense. They were considering themselves an end, which nobody who talks about this stuff outside of Zoom would ever consider the server to be an end. But if you trust the server, so if you have complete control of the server, then yes, that's a wonderful way for a mid-sized organization to operate. But then it's really hard to keep a server secure.
I mean, it's hard to have the know-how to run your own server in the first place. That's not very common in activist groups, but you could do it. And if it's a server that you didn't even have on the internet that much, you just turn it on when you're ready to have your call. That could be pretty secure. Mm-hmm. My biggest concern with Jitsi is kind of just the call quality, and I don't know if it's because people have less patience for it than a corporate platform, which is really weird. I think if people are familiar with stuff, right, even activists, right, they're so familiar with Zoom from their nonprofit jobs or their work, or they've just been using it with friends for a long time, that they can sometimes, in my experience, feel a little more forgiving and not have patience with an unfamiliar platform like Jitsi Meet. But I've seen Meet work really well. That's because we're on the radio. Meet with 2 E's. Wrap your head around that. Jitsi Meet.
For the meat space, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there we go. There is no more you. Right. So people complain that it's not great quality, but I've seen it work really well in debriefs of 20 or 30 people. But it's just kind of a work in progress a little bit. So I think it's a great alternative, though, to Zoom, in that you can have some guarantee that a movement organization is hosting it. And that's another thing that Rise Up could do if they wanted. They could host a Jitsi server. I haven't done it myself, but the Jitsi organization has instructions on how to deploy it to a server that should be definitely within reach of anyone that's able to put a server together. But I think the long-term development is really hopeful. The fact that it's an open source project that actually has substantial financial backing. There's a big company kind of absorbed the Jitsi developers, and hopefully they'll, time will tell, but hopefully they have a strong commitment to the open source project, and so you can see more development happening with that. But just like Riot, it's good for our movements long term.
I think a message that's come up many times is that, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and use different tools for different things. And, even if you think of a group that, has been working together for a long time, then maybe they're organizing over Keybase mostly, but say they have like one-off actions, maybe they move that onto Signal, so it's more ephemeral, that like action that's just taking place at a given space and time. So yeah, I think using a mix of tools gives you more resiliency. Of course, then you end up with like all these apps on your phone. You're like, what are these things? Too many messages, too many apps.
That's fine. Just let it go.
Yeah.
Just be fine with having 1,000 ways for people to contact you.
Yeah. I still don't have Slack.
No.
I'm still resisting it.
Ugh, Slack's fucking terrible.
I know. They're pushing for it at work.
Oh no.
As the EFF says in its surveillance self-defense guide, no technology is inherently secure or safe, and the practices of the users are key. And I know there's a lot of people that focus their studies and interest and advocacy around more secure ways of communication, such as y'all at the CLDC also point to this same thing. Do you have any considerations for folks that are concerned about their operational security while engaging with technology while doing organizing? Any like basic keys you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the message right now during lockdowns is very different from the message we were giving before then. So I don't know if you have a preference for which answer you want. I mean,
let's say we don't go back to normal. How about that?
I mean, assuming we all go back to normal, I think, we do first and foremost, consider security culture, right? Know and build trust among the people you're organizing with. And we would encourage people to meet in person as much as possible, and consider carefully, whatever you put into a digital form and share over the internet, whether it's end-to-end encrypted or not. Of course, that's not possible right now, so everyone's working in a place of, any kind of organizing they're doing is going over digital channels. So then the second point that we would also make before these strange times that we're currently in is to just make things as hard as possible for your opponent, right? Which means using end-to-end encryption when at all possible. You'll never make it impossible for your opponent to get the information they're after, but you can make it really costly for them, right? To make it so that they have to go after your individual devices, which is not only costly in terms of technology and time, but also costly politically if it's discovered that governments or corporations are going after individual activists' devices. And there's certain situations where we would say, be careful with your devices, like wherever a device could be grabbed from you, like at a protest if you're arrested and your devices are taken away, or at a border when your devices are taken away, to do whatever you can to make sure things are locked and turned off before that could happen. But at least that's not happening right now because we can't cross borders.
I agree with all of that. All I would add, I guess, is security culture, like IRL security culture and digital security culture, have a lot in common. Minimizing trust, compartmentalizing. Like, trust is precious, right? It's a good thing. We need to be able to trust each other. But it's never good to be forced into a situation where you are being required to trust somebody that you don't know, or it's a faceless corporation, or someone that doesn't share your politics, or, is an actively hostile, class, actor, whatever. So, there's no way, unfortunately, around having to trust your devices right now. So, maybe think about just doing your organizing on, like, a single device, if you can. Maybe your phone or your computer. Make sure it's up to date as much as you can. Like, security updates are essential. Governments can break into anything, but it's costly. Like Cora said, financially it can be, like, millions of dollars if your device is, like, totally an up-to-date, smartphone. But that cost drops a lot and quickly if your device is, like, say, years out of date. Even someone with no skills could find a way in. But I think it's knowing about, like, who you are, what your level of risk is. That can have to do with your identity, your politics, the kind of organizing you're doing. Obviously, the risk of what you're talking about. End-to-end encryption is going to be awesome for to thwart very damaging state suppression where they know everything about everyone. And even if it's not enough to, like, charge people with crimes or even infiltrate their communities, that level of total knowledge of our collective movements' actions can be extremely scary. And maybe Cora could talk about Embers a little bit, because I don't think anybody really really talks about that kind of level of threat. And, you know, doing end-to-end encryption and kind of like good, easy to do security measures does really protect us against a future where we don't have any agency at all. So it's really important. And as to whether you're targeted or not, I mean, you just gotta like try to compartmentalize as much as you can. Don't, you know, have conversations with lots of people if you're, you know, planning something risky. Yeah, so any kind of general advice that you could give about limiting your exposure and also keeping your comrades safe as well. You know, don't brag about the badass things you did back when we could leave the house. You know, because you may feel fine, but, you know, you're more vulnerable. Friends may not. So.
And I think, you know, like thinking of your devices and the services that you use as people within your security circle, right? So if you're doing all of your organizing on Facebook, then the Facebook, everything at Facebook and anybody who has access to those Facebook channels is in your circle too, right?
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg's right there with his arms around you and your friends.
Exactly.
Yeah, pretend he's Tom.
Yeah. You know, so it's reducing the number of people who know everything that you're doing. Yeah, so Embers is one of the questions we often get is, well, there's too much information out there for them to do anything with. Like, they're not going to be able to do anything useful with this information. And
how could someone really read all of my emails?
Right.
I send a lot of emails.
So Embers is one of these projects that is horrible, and, you know, file it under the research that shouldn't be done at, you know, publicly funded universities, but is. It was funded by IARPA, the Intelligence
Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Thank you. Yes, activity, Intelligence Advanced Research Project Activity.
Know your 5-letter.
Yeah, exactly. Which is like the intelligence little brother to DARPA, which is much more well known. So Embers was a project that was built at a university in partnership with defense contracting companies to make use of openly available information on the web, like Twitter feeds, like commodity prices, stock prices, and news stories. And they use this to build a predictive model that would be able to predict protests, both planned and unplanned protests, down to the city level, or even like neighborhood level, up to 7 days in advance. And they had this working live in Central American countries, is what they said in their research papers.
And that's where it's most successful, I think. But
well, that's where they were allowed to talk about it. They said, yes. So no, they said in their papers that, you know, we are allowed to talk about it being live in Central America. So presumably it's being used elsewhere in the world. So this is a live thing that's happening. And so, you know, add to that any information that isn't publicly available, and the information is just going to be richer and more useful, and you're going to get more detailed, you know, predictive models out of that. So there's definitely no needle that's too small to find in these haystacks when you have, you know, searching algorithms at the very basic level and artificial intelligence models at the more advanced level.
And this is using open source information, right? So it's just scraping stuff off of what's available to everyone on the internet.
That's right.
But I think it's important it's not too hard to make a jump from there, and it's important to make that jump if you are the state and have access to all of the information that is presumably obtainable through things like the PRISM program, the like data sharing agreement between the National Security Agency and all the big tech companies that was leaked by Ed Snowden. You know, you could probably do a lot more if you have access to that source data as well. You know, it's basically, it's machine learning, getting computers to recognize patterns, and the more information they have, the better they can train their models and train these machine learning algorithms to make predictions. And that's kind of what I meant when I said taking away our agency completely, because if they can not just anticipate our moves, but move to kind of neutralize them, before the plans even have a chance to take shape.
Then we'll never have another battle in Seattle.
As long as we don't have the movie that followed it, that's great. But
yeah, I mean, but you can do a lot by encrypting everything, basically.
And I mean, and that's not even like bringing into question like what happens when quantum computing becomes a reality, and suddenly all of that data with, without the encryption, let alone like with the encryption, like what happens when that becomes algorithmically like challenged.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have time for that. I think the cryptographic techniques that are resilient to quantum attacks are not used in a widespread fashion yet. But I think there's time for that to happen. And there's definitely, even if living under capitalism, there's a desire to be able to still protect information, right? So, states need to protect information from other states. Corporations need to be able to protect information from other corporations. So I think those techniques will exist.
One last thing about the way the question that you start off with about like EFF's general recommendation. I mean, they're spot on. You can't 100% trust your life or freedom to an electronic device that's too complicated, like so complicated that no single human, I think, knows fully how any one of these devices really functions. But a positive way of saying that you can thwart sort of mass surveillance and make it much harder for your opponents, as Cora said, to get at your stuff. At the same time, that you can't guarantee your own safety. On average and on the whole, you can guarantee the safety of your community. So practicing good digital security culture is really an act of solidarity at its heart. And I think people need to move away from, can I guarantee my own safety? To I know for sure that this is guaranteeing the safety of us and our communities as a whole. And I think that makes me feel a lot better, because no one wants to feel like they're doing this kind of complicated stuff and it's futile. I don't know, because for sure as a whole it means something.
And also when we're like, if similar to that, if we're using encryption on a regular basis for a lot of our communication and using it as wisely as possible, that normalizes the encryption, that decreases it's not just like, I'm only using encryption when I'm being sketchy,
Yeah, and it's not only for, you can't target people based on using encryption. Mm-hmm. And folks with privilege can do a lot to take away, whatever social, economic, racial privilege, whatever you have in society, you can take the sting out of that being used to stigmatize the actions as somehow suspect when communities, marginalized communities are using.
And I think we're in a much different world now than we were several years ago, where WhatsApp is used by billions of people around the world. So using end-to-end encryption is a very normal thing now.
Yeah. WhatsApp is horrible, though, just to say it.
Yeah, sure.
Because you have to trust Facebook.
No, I mean, they demand, I don't know if you've used it or not, but I had to use it as part of my job, and you cannot use it without sharing your address book and all your contacts with Facebook. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, Facebook isn't going to support a project that doesn't make them money.
It's just very aggressive. So, I've never seen another app that does that.
They've decided that, this is worth it if we can get all of the contact information of these users. And make our social network graph even better.
Sweet.
Doing your graph. Okay, sorry. Please ask your question.
It was mentioned, like, what if we're using a friend's computer to surf the internet? And I was thinking, I don't know if you have anything to say about Tails for a time when we are more mobile and interacting with other people's devices more, or Tor when we're talking about, like, wider participation in more anonymized engagement. Since I know there's, like, concerns about who owns the exit nodes, for instance, with Tor, but I don't know if you wanted to talk about those two tools.
I mean, I love Tor. I think it's a great tool. That's one of those things that you can do in solidarity, right? The more people who are using Tor, the better it is for everybody who's using Tor. The more people who put exit notes on, make it better for everyone as well, right? Because for an adversary to really get useful information from it, they have to control a lot of exit nodes. So the more people who are running Tor exit nodes or Tor nodes more generally, that aren't malicious actors, the better. Yeah, so just as a phrase, right? Tor allows you to browse the web anonymously, and I think that the Disrupt J20 story really drove it home as like a real live case where Tor would be great when the Trump administration demanded the records from DreamHost of people who had visited disruptj20.org. And that's a case of, well, if people were only accessing it via Tor, then there wouldn't be any information there to grab. It turned out to be a good situation and that DreamHost actually fought it, but I would not trust every web host to actually fight that kind of request from a federal government.
Yeah, and of course you could use a VPN, but lots of people use like private internet access, which is based in the US. Like they could pull that data from there if they wanted, if they wanted it bad enough.
What's the difference between a VPN and Tor?
So a VPN, you have to trust the VPN service provider, right? So the VPN service provider is a middleman for all of the requests from a whole bunch of people. And so a website like DisruptJ20 would just see that, oh, I'm getting a whole bunch of requests from vpn.riseup.net, but wouldn't know anything about the individual people. And this works great if you trust vpn.riseup.net, but if the VPN service provider that you're using is in cahoots with your opponent, then it doesn't matter. You might as well just be using the open web. Whereas Tor uses a random path through a much larger network, and it's uses layers of encryption that mean that subsequent nodes on that path through the network that you're using to get to your ultimate destination don't know anything about each other. So it provides you a much stronger cryptographic guarantee of privacy, or of anonymity rather, than VPN does.
Yeah, I mean, to put it, just to take a step back, like the purpose of a VPN or Tor is to break the link between me sitting at my computer and the websites that I'm visiting, because those links are visible to the website, like they know who I am, and my internet service provider knows, and anyone controlling the infrastructure in between knows where I'm going. So the goal is to break that link. With a VPN, you break that link by having a relay. You instead of going to the post office yourself, you hand your letters to like a trusted friend, and they hand stuff over to the post office for you and pick up your mail and then bring it back to you. If that friend isn't trustworthy, though, yeah, you're screwed. There's no point. Tor is like a complicated, hand off the package to like a random set of people who don't know the identities of anyone except the people they're in direct contact with. So anyway, Tor's great. Tails.
One more thing about Tor that this is like every time we've talked about it on the show, somebody emails us or like leaves a comment on YouTube and is like, well, Tor was founded by the naval intelligence and like it can't be trusted, and the NSA owns more than half of the exit nodes. And is that like, are there concerns about the funding sources for Tor as far as you're aware, or the fact that it was started as a part of naval intelligence?
I mean, so I would say, like, I think it's to start, I would say it's good to ask those questions, absolutely. And I think in many cases it's a big enough concern that yes, you shouldn't use the tool because of who's funding it or who's running it. In the case of Tor, it's a highly studied network and method at the academic level. It's probably the tool that activists use for digital security that has the most academic research papers written about it. Not that that's like, what does academia know? But I think it's been attacked and studied and fixed enough over the years that I think it is a robust tool to use. I think that ownership of exit nodes, an opponent does need to control a large fraction of the exit nodes for that to be a valid way to break Tor reliably. Correlation attacks, timing attacks by a global adversary is probably more likely how an NSA level adversary would go after it. I don't think that's as likely for regional activism, possibly more likely to be used in sort of terrorism level actions.
I mean, my understanding about the timing attack is that it's like a confirmation attack. Is like if you suspect someone of being the real life human behind an online identity. Like that's how Jeremy Hammond was captured, because there was a snitch in his he was part of the anti-sec collective that leaked the Stratford documents, which is really interesting. If you should please interview him if he's ever free. You know, they knew who he was, so they could like check the timing of the information leaving his computer and the packets going to the website that they suspected him of using. But that can't really be used in advance, or that can't be used like after the fact, I don't think, to get people. I don't really know enough about it.
Unless they were storing that information.
Yeah. As for the exit node thing, I mean, definitely that's possible. But we know at least as of 2012, like that wasn't discussed at all in any of the Snowden disclosures, right? That they're somehow gonna just run a bunch of exit nodes and that's gonna solve it. They, the NSA internal documents that were never meant to be leaked, complained a lot about Tor and how difficult it was to get at all that information. Yeah, I mean, it's still a computer tool, you don't know, but it's definitely, I mean, I think it's really important when you're telling people though about it, and I forgot to do that, of course, we forgot to do that, but when you're talking about Tor, it's good to be upfront about that source of funding, because the last thing you want is for people to leave and then come back, discover like after a while that, you weren't clear about that. All the browsers that you use, like the Tor browser that you use to access the Tor network, and all of the software that runs the different nodes is all open source as well. So you don't need to trust that project itself to not be doing anything in the background.
And I guess the important thing of it being open source means that not only can somebody be looking for failures in it, but people are looking for failures in it, right?
Yeah, I mean, and this is one of those cases where like people are looking at the code all the time. It's not just like formally this project is open source, so whatever, but if it's really obscure, no one's really looking. But yeah, it's an interesting academic project, and I wouldn't totally dismiss academics. It's pretty cool academics.
Say 2 employees of university.
Yeah. Any more about Tor? I don't know what to say. There's like a cool...
There was Tails. Tails is another tool. I think Yeah, we've recommended Tails to some people. You're holding one right now. We've recommended Tails to people before. I think it's something that requires a little bit of training for people to use in the right context. But I think it can be useful, in the context that you suggested, which is, using a friend's laptop, or if you're traveling and you don't want to bring your computer with you, it can be a safe way to bring, some of your information along with you on an encrypted USB stick that also has an operating system that you can plug into another computer. But it can be challenging to actually get it to work on any random computer that you want to plug it into.
It's gotten a lot better though.
Yeah.
And Tails stands for the Amnesic Incognito Live System. So Live System is like, you can boot it up from any computer. You have to be able to restart the computer, and it's not clear whether it would work in any random library, but your friend should at least let you be able to do it. I think like brand new computers it might struggle with, but I think most computers it works, and it's a lot more polished. It's a lot prettier than it used to be years ago.
And it runs everything through Tor. So all of the internet traffic from it goes through Tor.
So it's going to feel slow.
Yeah.
Even if it's not. But that's the incognito part, is that you can't fuck it up. It's not like you can you're like, oh shit, I typed that into Firefox instead of the Tor browser or whatever. It also is designed to forget, so the minute you unplug it from a computer, even if you're in the middle of using it, the computer's memory gets wiped. And the disk should be back to like the pristine state that it was in before. So it's a powerful tool. I think a lot of journalists use it to leaks and stuff. But.
Yeah, and I think it's good for like if you're doing research on a specific company, or for a specific action. It would be hard to use in the long term. I mean, maintaining anonymity in the long term is really difficult, right? And you still have to be really smart about what you do within the system, right? If you're trying to shop on Amazon over Tails, there's not really much point because you're going to be typing in your banking information and your home address to get your deliveries, right? So you have to be smart about what you're using it for.
I mean, the biggest thing is, like, I just can't see people, like, restarting their computer every time they want to, like, use Tor. So that's what Tor browser's for. But definitely for, like, the sharing roommates' computers or whatever. One thing that I really wanted to talk about with Tails is that, have you had anyone talk about the bad USB?
No one has talked about the bad USB issue with Tails on here.
Bad USB is like, it's one of these exotic attacks, but it's like, it sounds exotic, but it's like apparently pretty easy to carry out. USB sticks, like all electronic devices, have like storage, right? Like flash drive has storage, and then it's got something called firmware, which kind of like is the operating system for that drive. And so someone figured out a way to trick a USB stick into like basically putting a virus or a worm inside that firmware, and using that USB stick to infect a computer. That computer would then infect all the USB sticks plugged into it. And the most famous example of this is the Stuxnet worm that was used to attack Iranian, nuclear uranium enrichment facilities. And so, like, when I became aware of this, I'm like, God damn it. I don't feel great about giving everybody a USB stick to plug into all random computers everywhere. So that was something that, like, made me a lot less enthusiastic for Tails. But there are some flash drives that you can buy that have two things. One is like signed firmware, which makes it very, very difficult to do an attack like that, and also a physical write switch. So, like, remember your 3.5-inch floppy disk? There's like the little toggle. The USB stick would have that as well. So you could burn Tails onto it, flip that switch, and know that your copy of Tails isn't going to be changed on you.
Rewritten. Oh, that's
but you wouldn't be able to use any storage on it.
I mean, but there's the signed firmware to help with that. Anyway, whatever. It's a company. They're kind of expensive. A company called Kangaroo makes them.
That's good to know.
Whatever. Yeah, I don't know. That's what I would definitely like recommend that people kind of take that caution.
Thank you so much. Please apologize to your boss for me. I didn't mean to keep you so long.
No, it's fine. It's seriously, you'd hear a pitter patter and coming upstairs. It's been great spending a couple hours with you here. Thanks for making the time to do this.
This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinailstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinailstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinailstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville, specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.